There are over 300,000 plant species on Earth. The modern garden uses them one at a time, lined up in rows, isolated from each other, each one fighting its own battles against pests, disease, nutrient deficiency, and pollination failure alone. That isolation is not natural. It is industrial. And it is costing you yield, time, and money every single season. Meanwhile, 7 specific plants, grown alongside your vegetables and fruits as deliberate companions, can fix nitrogen directly from the atmosphere, repel destructive pests through chemical warfare, attract the predatory insects that eliminate aphids and caterpillars, lure pollinators that double fruit set, and prime the immune systems of neighboring crops through invisible, volatile signals. All without a single bag of fertilizer, a single bottle of pesticide, or a single dollar spent beyond the cost of the seed. The agrochemical industry sells pest control and fertility as separate products. Nature packages them inside a plant. The record opens in pre-colonial North America. For centuries before European contact, indigenous farming communities across the eastern woodlands grew 3 crops together in the same mound: corn, pole beans, and squash, in a system they called the Three Sisters. The corn provided a living trellis for the beans to climb. The beans fixed atmospheric nitrogen through symbiotic bacteria in their root nodules and fed it to the corn and squash. The squash spread its broad leaves across the soil surface, shading out weeds, retaining moisture, and deterring animals with its prickly vines. 3 plants, 0 inputs, a complete agricultural system that fed nations for hundreds of generations. Virginia Cooperative Extension at Virginia Tech published a comprehensive review of companion planting in 2026, documenting the scientific mechanisms behind the practice, nitrogen fixation, biochemical pest suppression, trap cropping, beneficial insect habitat creation, and spatial interaction effects. The ATTRA Sustainable Agriculture Program, operated through the National Center for Appropriate Technology, published a detailed review citing decades of research on marigolds, alliums, nasturtium, and legume intercropping systems. A 2004 PhD thesis at West Virginia University documented a 20% average yield advantage from companion planting across multiple garden-scale trials. A 2024 study published in Plant Cell Reports demonstrated that companion plants communicate with neighboring crops through volatile chemical signals, priming their immune defenses before pests even arrive. The science is no longer anecdotal. The mechanisms are mapped. The yield data is published. The garden center simply does not stock what a seed packet already contains. Here are the 7 companion plants that make everything grow faster. Companion 1. Beans, the nitrogen factory that feeds the entire bed. Nitrogen is the single most consumed nutrient in any vegetable garden. It drives every leaf, every stem, and every molecule of chlorophyll. It is also the single most expensive nutrient to purchase synthetically, and the one most likely to leach out of your soil before roots can absorb it. Every season, gardeners pour bags of nitrogen-based fertilizer onto their beds and watch it vanish in the first heavy rain. The bean plant bypasses this entire cycle by manufacturing its own nitrogen supply directly from the atmosphere. The mechanism is symbiotic nitrogen fixation. Rhizobium bacteria colonize the root nodules of legumes and convert atmospheric nitrogen gas into ammonium ions that the plant can use directly. The host plant provides the bacteria with sugars, and the bacteria provide the plant with nitrogen. The system is self-sustaining, self-regulating, and free. New Mexico State University Extension published a detailed guide on nitrogen fixation by Legumes, confirming that while common beans are relatively modest fixers compared to clover or soybeans, they still contribute measurable nitrogen to the surrounding soil through root exudation and decomposition of root tissue at the end of the season. The Virginia Tech Companion Planting Review confirmed that including a legume in any companion system provides nitrogen benefit to neighboring plants, especially in soils naturally low in organic matter. The practical value goes beyond the nitrogen. Beans grow vertically when given support, occupying minimal horizontal space in the garden and delivering both a food crop and a soil amendment at the same time. Interplant bush beans between rows of heavy nitrogen feeders such as corn, peppers, squash, and brassicas. Plant pole beans on the same trellis as tomatoes or cucumbers so they share vertical space while their root systems share nitrogen underground. At the end of the season, cut bean plants at the soil line rather than pulling them. Leave the roots and their nodules in the ground to decompose through winter. The nitrogen stored in those nodules becomes available to the following season's crops with no additional purchase. Companion 2. Marigolds, the underground chemical weapon. Marigolds are the most scientifically validated companion plant in the entire gardening literature, and the mechanism they use is not what most gardeners expect. The benefit is not the flower, it is the root. Marigold roots, specifically those of Tagetes species, produce a class of sulfur containing compounds called thiophenes, with alpha-terthionyl being the most potent. These compounds are toxic to plant parasitic nematodes, the microscopic root-feeding worms that cause stunting, wilting, and yield loss across dozens of vegetable crops. Nematode damage is one of the most underdiagnosed problems in home gardens because the symptoms mimic nutrient deficiency and water stress, and the organism is invisible to the naked eye. The University of Florida IFAS Extension published a detailed review of marigolds for nematode management, authored by Kruger in 2019. The research confirmed that certain marigold species, particularly French marigolds and African marigolds, suppress root knot nematode populations when interplanted with susceptible crops. The review documented the chemical mechanism, thiophene production and release from living root tissue, and confirmed that marigolds planted as a seasonal companion reduce nematode pressure in the surrounding root zone for the duration of the planting and into the following season. The ATTRA review confirmed the broader biochemical pest suppression role of marigolds. It documented that thiophene release from marigold roots creates a zone of biological exclusion around nearby vegetable plants. A 2019 study published in PLOS1 showed that companion planting with French marigolds protects tomato plants from glasshouse whiteflies by emitting airborne limonene from marigold foliage. The protection operates both underground and above ground, through root chemistry and through volatile emissions from the leaves and flowers. Plant marigolds as a border row around every garden bed, or interplant them every 2 to 3 feet between vegetable rows. French marigolds are preferred for nematode suppression. African marigolds produce the strongest thiophene concentrations, but they require more space. Allow the marigolds to grow through the entire season without deadheading. At the end of fall, turn the entire plants, roots included, into the soil. The thiophenes released from decomposing marigold tissue continue suppressing nematodes through winter. Companion 3. Dill, the predator recruitment station. Every garden has aphids, every garden has caterpillars, every garden has whiteflies, spider mites, and thrips. The conventional response is a bottle of pesticide that kills the pests and, along with them, the predatory insects that were keeping those pest populations in check naturally. Within 2 weeks of spraying, the pests return. The predators do not. The cycle repeats, and the garden center sells another bottle. Dill breaks this cycle by recruiting the predators instead of replacing them. When dill reaches its flowering stage, the flat, open umbel flowers produce large quantities of nectar and pollen that are specifically accessible to small-bodied beneficial insects, ladybird beetles, lacewings, hoverflies, parasitic wasps, and tachinid flies, the exact predator and parasitoid species that feed on the pests, destroying your vegetables. Virginia Tech Companion Planting Review explicitly names dill as a companion that attracts ladybugs and other predatory insects when allowed to flower in the garden. The ATTRA review documents the broader principle of beneficial insect habitat creation, confirming that pollen-rich herbs like dill and cilantro establish and sustain populations of parasitic wasps and predatory insects that provide season-long biological pest control without any spray, any chemical, or any repeat purchase. The critical detail is timing. Dill must be allowed to flower to function as a companion. Most gardeners harvest dill for culinary use before it bolts, removing the very structure that attracts beneficials. The solution is to plant 2 patches. One is for the kitchen, harvested regularly to delay flowering. The other is for the garden ecosystem, planted among vegetable rows and left entirely alone to bolt, flower, and attract predators through the peak pest season of midsummer. Plant dill near brassicas, peppers, tomatoes, and cucurbits, the crops most heavily targeted by aphids and caterpillars. Allow flowering dill plants to stand through the entire growing season. The predator populations they recruit will suppress pest outbreaks more effectively and more sustainably than any spray on the shelf. Companion 4. Garlic and onions. The chemical perimeter defense. Alliums, the plant family that includes garlic, onions, leeks, chives, and shallots, produce some of the most potent volatile sulfur compounds in the plant kingdom. Those compounds are not just responsible for the smell that makes your eyes water in the kitchen. They are the same chemistry that repels a broad spectrum of insect pests in the garden. A 2025 study by Young and colleagues, published in Crop Protection, tested garlic as a companion plant for suppressing green peach aphid infestations in brassica crops under both field and laboratory conditions. The results documented reduced aphid survival and fecundity on brassica plants grown alongside garlic companions compared to brassica plants grown alone. The volatile sulfur compounds released by garlic foliage disrupted the aphid's ability to locate and colonize the host crop. The Virginia Tech review confirmed Alliums as a biochemical pest suppression mechanism in companion planting systems, documenting that the volatile compounds released by garlic, onions, and chives interfere with the chemical cues that pest insects use to find their host plants. The disruption is not a physical barrier. It is a chemical one. The allium volatiles create a confusing olfactory environment that makes it harder for pests to locate the vegetables you are trying to protect. The practical application is simple and space-efficient. Plant garlic cloves or onion sets as a border row around beds containing brassicas, carrots, peppers, lettuce, and tomatoes. Interplant chives at the corners and midpoints of raised beds. The allium perimeter creates a continuous zone of volatile suppression that reduces pest colonization throughout the growing season. Chives are perennial and return every spring without replanting, making them a permanent defensive infrastructure investment. The added benefit is harvest. Unlike marigolds or dill, which serve primarily as companion plants, every garlic bulb, onion, and chive plant you grow for pest defense also produces food. The companion doubles as a crop. The defense doubles as a harvest. Companion 5. Nasturtiums. The decoy that saves your harvest. Trap cropping is one of the most elegant strategies in companion planting. and Nasturtiums are its most effective practitioner. The principle is simple. Some insects prefer certain plants over others. If you provide a plant they prefer even more than your vegetables, the pests concentrate on the trap crop and leave the main crop alone. A 2017 review by Ben Issa and colleagues, published through PMC, analyzed companion planting strategies for aphid pest management. It documented Nasturtiums as an effective trap crop that draws aphids away from main vegetable plantings. The review confirmed that Nasturtiums are highly attractive to aphids, black flies, and white flies. They concentrate pest populations on the sacrificial plant, reducing infestation pressure on adjacent vegetable crops. A Virginia Tech review confirmed trap cropping as a scientifically validated mechanism in companion planting systems. It noted the key principle: offer a plant that is more attractive to the pest than the main crop. Nasturtiums fulfill this role for aphids across a wide range of garden vegetables, including beans, brassicas, cucurbits, and tomatoes. The strategic advantage of Nasturtiums is that they are edible, beautiful, and self-seeding. The flowers and leaves are peppery and nutritious. The plant sprawls aggressively and fills gaps between vegetables, suppressing weeds while functioning as a living aphid trap. At the end of the season, Nasturtiums drop seed that germinates the following spring, creating a self-renewing trap crop system that requires no replanting. Plant Nasturtiums around the perimeter of vegetable beds and along the borders of brassica, bean, and cucurbit plantings. Allow the plants to become infested with aphids. Do not spray them. The concentrated aphid population on the Nasturtiums draws ladybugs, lacewings, and parasitic wasps to the garden, which then spill over onto your vegetable crops and provide biological control across the entire bed. The trap crop becomes a predator breeding ground. The pest infestation becomes the solution. Companion 6. Calendula, the pollination amplifier. Pollination failure is one of the most common and least recognized causes of low yield in home gardens. Tomatoes may bloom heavily and set few fruit. Squash can produce dozens of flowers and no zucchini. Cucumbers can flower at every node and produce nothing. In most cases, the flowers are healthy, and the pollen is viable. The problem is that no pollinator arrived to move it. Calendula, also called pot marigold, is one of the most powerful pollinator-attracting plants available to the home gardener. The bright orange and yellow flowers produce abundant nectar and pollen that attract honeybees, bumblebees, native solitary bees, hoverflies, and lacewings, often from distances most vegetable flowers cannot match. The University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources Program documented Calendula as a companion that attracts pollinators including bees and hoverflies, while also recruiting beneficial insects like lacewings and ladybugs that provide pest control. The dual function is the strategic advantage. Calendula does not just increase pollination, it increases biological pest control simultaneously, delivering two companion benefits from a single plant. The blooming window is the critical detail. Calendula flowers continuously from late spring through the first hard frost if deadheaded regularly. This extended bloom period overlaps with the flowering window of every major fruiting vegetable in the garden, ensuring that pollinators are present from the first tomato blossom through the last squash flower of the season. Plant calendula in clusters of 3 to 5 plants at the ends of vegetable rows and along the borders of beds containing fruiting crops. Allow some flowers to go to seed for self-sowing the following year. Calendula is hardy, drought-tolerant, and thrives in the same conditions as most vegetables. It blooms heavily enough to be visible to pollinators from across the garden, drawing them into the beds where your vegetables need them most. Companion 7. Basil, the invisible bodyguard. Basil is the most commonly recommended companion plant for tomatoes in the gardening world. The advice is ancient and nearly universal. The science explaining why it works was published in 2024. A study by Yoshida and colleagues, published in Plant Cell Reports and indexed through PMC, demonstrated that basil plants release volatile compounds that prime the wound defense response in companion tomato plants before any pest damage has occurred. The basil volatiles triggered faster and stronger expression of defense-related genes in tomato leaves, including genes in the jasmonic acid signaling pathway, the mitogen-activated protein kinase cascade, and the reactive oxygen species defense system. In plain language, Basil told the tomato to prepare for attack, and the tomato obeyed. When pest damage did occur, the primed tomato mounted a defense response that was measurably faster and stronger than an unprimed plant growing alone. This is not pest repulsion. This is immune system priming. The basil does not keep the pests away. It makes the tomato stronger before they arrive. The mechanism operates through airborne volatile signals, a form of plant-to-plant chemical communication that science has only recently begun to document at the molecular level. The yield data was documented earlier. A 2004 PhD thesis by Bomford at West Virginia University tested companion planting combinations across multiple garden-scale trials and calculated relative yield indices showing an average 20% yield advantage when tomato or Brussels sprout was planted with basil companions compared to monoculture controls. A 2025 study published through PMC tracked tomato yield under nitrogen reduction and companion planting over 2 consecutive years. Companion planted tomatoes produced 34 to 35% higher yields than monoculture tomatoes, with improved sugar content, lycopene levels, and nitrogen use efficiency. The companion planting shifted rhizosphere bacterial communities toward beneficial Pseudomonas species and increased the abundance of stress defense metabolites in root exudates. Plant basil within 12 inches of every tomato plant in the garden. The volatile signal range documented in the Yoshida study requires close proximity, the closer the better. Do not remove basil flowers prematurely. The flowering basil continues to emit volatiles at high concentration and also functions as a pollinator attractant for the adjacent tomato flowers. At the end of the season, turn basil plants into the soil as a green manure that feeds the microbial community through winter. But it survived. The knowledge of companion planting never disappeared into seed company archives or chemical manufacturer filing cabinets. While the garden industry consolidated around monoculture row planting, single-species seed packets, and bottled solutions for every problem that isolation creates, indigenous farming communities, cottage gardeners, and agricultural researchers preserved the companion systems through centuries of institutional indifference. The Three Sisters polyculture fed North American nations for hundreds of generations before any European botanist documented it. Japanese farmers intercropped rice with azolla fern for nitrogen fixation for over 1,000 years. European cottage gardeners planted marigolds alongside tomatoes, basil beside peppers, and nasturtiums around beans for centuries before a university published a paper explaining the chemistry behind it. Western science caught up. Virginia Tech published the comprehensive companion planting review in 2026. The University of Florida published the Marigold nematode research. The ATTRA program published decades of intercropping data. West Virginia University documented the 20% yield advantage. Kagoshima University documented the basil tomato volatile communication mechanism in 2024. The Crop Protection Journal published the garlic aphid suppression study in 2025. The PMC aphid review confirmed Nasturtium as effective trap crops. Every mechanism that traditional gardeners observed intuitively has now been confirmed at the molecular level. Today, companion planting is accelerating in home gardens. Not because the seed companies promoted it, but because gardeners who spent years buying pesticide sprays, synthetic fertilizers, and replacement plants every time something failed started asking why a $5 packet of Marigold seed could do what a $20 bottle of nematicide never did. Because growers watching their squash go unpollinated despite healthy flowers started asking why a $3 packet of Calendula seed solved the problem overnight. Because tomato growers who planted basil on a hunch and watched their plants grow stronger started asking why. The silence around companion planting is breaking. You can grow what they isolated. Start with one companion per bed this season. If aphids are your primary problem, plant Nasturtiums along the border and garlic at the corners. If nematode damage has stunted your tomatoes or peppers, ring the bed with French marigolds and leave them through winter. If pollination failure has cost you fruit, plant calendula in clusters at the ends of every row containing a fruiting crop. If nitrogen is your limiting factor, interplant bush beans between every heavy feeder in the garden. If you grow tomatoes, plant basil within 12 inches of every stem and do not remove it until the season ends. If beneficial insects are absent from your garden, let a patch of dill flower through midsummer and watch the predator population arrive within weeks. The total investment for seed packets of all 7 companion plants runs under $20. That is less than the cost of a single bottle of garden pesticide at any garden center, and these companions do not stop working when the bottle runs dry. The marigold roots release thiophene every day the plant is alive. The bean nodules fix nitrogen every hour the sun is shining. The dill flowers recruit predators every morning they are open. The basil volatiles prime tomato defenses every second they are in the air. The biology compounds, the protection builds, the yield climbs, the cost stays at the seed. The agrochemical industry profits from the assumption that every garden problem requires a purchased solution applied from a bottle or a bag. These 7 companion plants begin with the opposite truth, that the most effective pest control, fertility system, and pollination service in the garden is not a product. It is a plant. The only thing it costs is the knowledge of where to put it. That knowledge was never lost. It was waiting in the Three Sisters mound, in the cottage garden border, in the research literature, in the hands of growers who never needed a spray bottle to protect their harvest. If this seed was finally freed for you, subscribe to Hank's Gardening Journey and hit the bell. Every like and every share helps break the silence. The next seed breaks free soon.